A gute Woche. Rabbi soll gesund sein began the Farbrengen this afternoon that there are many inyonim about this Shabbos. However, there is one inyan which is extremely outstanding, and this is something which affects all of us, the fact that it is Shabbos Chanukah. And not only is it the first Shabbos Chanukah, it is the second Shabbos Chanukah. In other words, this year we have two Shabbosim of Chanukah. Normally, we must have one Shabbos of Chanukah every year, because Chanukah lasts a week. So within a week, we always must have a Shabbos. However, the specialty this year is that we have two Shabbosim in Chanukah. Neder Rebbe stressed right at the beginning that we know, Gemara tells us, one cannot compare the impact something has on somebody when he sees it or when he hears of it. Seeing leaves a much stronger effect on people than just hearing about things. To such an extent rather, that there's a Gemara, Ein Eid Nase Dayin, which means, if somebody witnessed something, he's an Eid, he witnessed something, whatever the case may be, he saw something. He was present when it took place. So Gemara says that this individual cannot be a judge in this matter. Why? Being that he saw it with his own eyes, so he already has a strong impression of this matter, of whatever the case may be. And that is why it would be unfair that he should be a judge in this. When a judge is somebody, an outsider, a third party, and he hears from both of the parties what the case is, then he could come up with a fair decision. However, when he is present b'shas ma'aseh, he is present when the thing is taking place, and he sees with his own eyes what's happening, then he has his opinion already set, and it has such a strong effect on him that whatever he will hear from the other side, from the other opponent, will not budge him in any way. Therefore, the Rebbe says, when we hear something, it always has less effect than when we see it. When we're talking about the specialty in today's day, this is something so obvious that each one of us feel it and see it, the fact that today is the second Shabbos of Shabbos Chanukah. And the Rebbe continues, it's customary that we always recite a haftarah every Shabbos after the reading of the Torah. And usually, the contents of the maftir is always something similar to what we read in the Seder. We will notice that Shabbos Chanukah, there's a special haftarah to say. So last week, which was the first Shabbos in Chanukah, we had a special haftarah for the first Shabbos of Chanukah, and it's very obvious why that haftarah was chosen for Shabbos Chanukah, because in that haftarah it's discussed about a huge menorah. Also, there is a tefillah, menorah zahav, kula, large menorah, v'gula al roisha, v'shiva nereseha, and the 7 candles of the menorah. And then the haftarah concludes with a tefillah regarding la'asid lavai, concluding with the words choice chein la. Chein is an expression of beauty, a double expression of beauty. So it's very obvious to understand why last week's haftarah was chosen for Shabbos Chanukah. However, regarding this week's haftarah, which was said today from after, it's a haftarah which tells us how the days of Shloimeh, all the vessels were prepared for the first Beis HaMikdash. And the pasuk begins, Vayas Chiroim, who was a descendant of Shevet Dan, as we will hear soon. He helped Shloimeh make all the various vessels which were needed for the Beis HaMikdash. True, it is also mentioned regarding the menorah that he made 10 menorahs, a total of 10 menorahs before the entrance of the Beis HaMikdash, 5 from the right and 5 from the left. However, this is something which is mentioned like bypassing in the haftarah. It's not the main contents of this parsha. Navi is not something which deals regarding the menorah. It is also mentioned here about the menorah. However, the general contents of the haftarah is something which does not have a very obvious relation to Chanukah. Rabbi said it's brought in Svarim that the contents of the Haftarah always has a shaykhus to the Sedra which was read, and in many instances it has a shaykhus to the latter part of the Sedra. Therefore, this week, being that the last part of Kriyas HaTorah was what we read for Maftir, we read about Chanukah, so the Haftarah, which the Maftir says, should definitely be something which deals about Chanukah, which relates something about Chanukah. And as just mentioned, we don't find anything in the contents of this Maftir regarding Chanukah. Furthermore, like any union in Torah, what is the lesson which we can derive from the contents of this Haftarah as far as Hamaisa Hu Ha'ikar, deed, action is what counts most? What lesson can we derive from this Maftir? So the Rebbe explained, continued, the idea of Chanukah is Mishatishka HaChama. Gemara tells us, when are we told to light the Chanukah candles? Mishatishka HaChama, from sunset. From sunset on, we are permitted to light the Chanukah candles. What does this mean in the spiritual sense? What does Tishka HaChama mean? Tishka HaChama means it is dark by Yidden. It is dark by Yidden. Yidden are in Golus, and it is dark, spiritual darkness. And what is the idea of Ner Chanukah? The idea of Ner Chanukah is to bring Lichtigkeit where it is dark. In other words, wherever there is a spiritual darkness, how do we illuminate this darkness? This is accomplished through the Neiros Chanukah. What do we read in this Haftarah? Chiroim prepared vessels for the Beis HaMikdash. What is the idea of preparing vessels for the Beis HaMikdash? We take Gashmiisdike things, gold, silver, copper, all these things which are Gashmiisdike items. In fact, Gemara tells us, Medrash says, what is the reason HaKadosh Baruch Hu created gold? The reason, Nivra Zahav, why did he create gold? Because of the Beis HaMikdash, so that it should be able to be used in the Beis HaMikdash, but in the meantime it's still a Gashmiisdike thing. What did Chirom do? He took all of these Gashmiisdike inyanim and prepared them and uplifted them to the level that they should be roi, they should be worthy of being used in the Beis HaMikdash. In other words, what is the message of this week's Haftarah? The message of the Haftarah is the concept of making kelim, preparing things, preparing an area where we can illuminate, where we can bring Kedusha into. That is the message of this Haftarah. And here the Rebbe expressed himself in continuation to what the Rebbe is demanding constantly, the inyan of Shlichus. The Rebbe said the inyan of Shlichus is really shaychus to each and every one of us. And he expressed himself in Yiddish. Jeder einer und eine, which means every one, but male and female, is capable of selecting at least one person. And we should work with this one person and uplift him and accomplish what Haftarah tells us, make him a vessel, make him a proper keilah to absorb godliness, to be able to be usable for the spiritual Beis HaMikdash, which every Yid really has a spiritual Beis HaMikdash. And the Rebbe went furthermore. The Rebbe says at times we come across individuals, we come across Yidden, whom we have an opportunity of saying good morning to, or we have an opportunity of saying good Shabbos to them, and we think that it's nothing, we just greet the people and we go on further. And it is not so. It is our obligation and our responsibility that when we come in contact with a Yid, even if it's only a good morning and a good Shabbos, we bypass them and we greet them. We should utilize this contact and maintain this contact, and ultimately we will see that through this contact it will be fruitful, and we will accomplish and we will uplift these individual Yidden and bring them closer and closer to Yiddishkeit. Rebbe concluded the Sikha. Though we have already accomplished, obviously the Rebbe was referring to the big success in Miftzah Chanukah this week all over the world. However, we will see that if we put more effort into the inyanim which we do, yagaita, which means putting in more strain and more effort, then umotzasa we will have yet bigger and yet greater results. Then the Rebbe continued we keep on stressing that this is the second Shabbos on Chanukah. In other words, this year is a special year. There's a Chanukah that has two Shabbos. So obviously, when we refer to Shabbos we refer to as Shabbos Bereshis. Shabbos reminds us of the creation when the Rebbeinu created the world, and then Shabbos was the first day of rest. Then comes Sunday. Sunday we always refer to as Yom Rishon, the first day. Monday is the second day. We already had tens of thousands of first days. Since the inception of the world, since the Rebbeinu created the world, we had many Yom Rishons and many Yom Shenis. Still we see, how do we refer to this day? We refer to this day also as a Yom Rishon. It's the first. Why? Because every week is a separate cycle. And every week we look at Yom Rishon as if this would be the very first day of creation. Yom Sheni the same. B'meila, when it comes to Shabbos, we refer to Shabbos as Shabbos Bereshis. And interesting, the Rebbe continues, this year is the year of Shemitah, as it came out to mention already at many occasions. If we look into Rashi, where the Torah tells us regarding the year of rest, a sabbatical year, V'shavsa ha'aretz Shabbos l'Hashem, that the year should rest, the year of Shabbos to the Rebbeinu. What does Rashi say? Like Shabbos Bereshis, like the first Shabbos. So we see that there's an inyan that Shabbos is like Shabbos Bereshis. Sunday is like the first Sunday. And Monday like the first Monday. So if so, the Rebbe asks, when we're talking about the greatness of this Chanukah, and we say that this Chanukah is a special Chanukah, why? Because we have two Shabbosim in this Chanukah. Obviously, when it comes to the second Shabbos, it's not a second, it's back at first. Because we keep on stressing that the greatness of every Shabbos is its similarity to Shabbos Bereshis, like the first Shabbos in creation, which HaKadosh Baruch Hu created. So Mamela, what is the great inyan? If we say Shabbos 1 of Chanukah, and there's a Shabbos 2, there's a second Shabbos of Chanukah, obviously the second Shabbos of Chanukah is again a Shabbos. Shabbos, we always stress, the greatness of Shabbos is that it is like Shabbos Bereshis, like the first Shabbos which the Rebbeinu created. So on one hand we say that it is a mile, it is something outstanding in having two Shabbos and Chanukah. On the other hand, based on what we learn all over, it comes out that a second Shabbos is not a mile, is not something special. On the contrary, the second Shabbos is again like a first Shabbos. It's again like Shabbos Bereshis. And here the Rebbe continued to explain this based on what the Alter Rebbe explains in Tanya. Which originally it's a Gemara. There's a concept of an Oved Elokim, a certain person who's considered serving HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and then we have a concept of Lo Yavodoi, one who's considered he's not serving the Rebbeinu. And the Gemara explains, who is considered Oved Elokim, a servant of the Rebbeinu? Gemara says, it's Gemara Bava Basra, quoted in Tanya, Zeh hashoyne pirkoi meya pamim ve'echot. If a person reviews his learning 101 times, he's considered serving the Rebbeinu, a servant of Hashem. One who does not review his studies 101 times, but reviews it 100 times, is not considered a servant of Hashem. What is the explanation behind such a Gemara? Excuse me. So as it's explained, in those days they didn't have no svarim. So everything was rehearsed orally. So in order to understand something properly, one had to review it many, many times. The standard custom of reviewing an inyan in Torah, which was acceptable in the times of Gemara, in the times of Mishnah, was one should review an inyan 100 times. This was the acceptable practice. Mamela, when one reviewed an inyan 100 times, he really didn't do anything out of the ordinary. He did the same thing as everybody else does. When one reviews it 101 times, he's already doing something special. Everybody reviews this inyan and learning, rehearses it 100 times. He did something special by being shoyne pirkoi, by learning his learning, reviewing his learning, meya pamim ve'echad 101 times. Actually, what is explanation behind this? It's like Chassidus teaches, Lech lecha ma'artzecha u'mimelaretecha mebeis avicha. What did the Rebbe tell Avraham Avinu? He should go from his country, from his father's home, from his birth area. What does that mean? Everybody has his instilled habits. He has the habits which everyone has, which he was raised with these habits. These are the habits of his country, these are the habits of his home, and so forth. When do we see that a person really goes out of himself? He goes l'mayla mimdida v'hagbala. He's not in his limitations. When he goes above and beyond the routine midas and the routine derech, routine path which he is used to. That is when we see that the person goes above and beyond l'mayla mimdida v'hagbala, if we were to apply the Chassidish expression. Memela, the same here. The one who reviews his learning only meya pa'amim, only 100 times, he does the avodas Hashem within the realm, within the frame of medida v'hagbala, of limitation, just like everybody else. We cannot give him the special title of Oived Elokim, that he's considered a servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. However, this person who does above and beyond which everybody does. Everybody at that time was only reviewing 100 times. He's fulfilling Lech lecha ma'artzecha mimeladetecha mebeis avicha. He is going above the standard and accepted practice of how many times an Indian Torah should be reviewed. That is why he will deserve the title of being considered an Oved Elokim, somebody who is a servant of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. What do we derive from this? That by going above limitations, above and beyond limitations, this gives a person a status of being considered an Oved Elokim. The same the Rebbe continues is when we're talking about the 2 Shabbos and Chanukah. The fact that this year we have 2 Shabbos and Chanukah, this is like the inyan of Oved Elokim compared to the person who's reviewing his studies 101 times. In other words, here we have an opportunity to go l'mayla mimdida v'hagbala, to go above our limitations, and we are observing Chanukah and all the special inyanim which Chanukah brings along with it, and the message of Chanukah, and so forth. All of this we absorb in what type of a way? In a way of l'mayla mimdida v'hagbala. We're going above our limitations, and that is why when we do that, we can be considered an Oved Elokim, a servant of the Rebbe. Here the Rebbe brought in, we find that when Aaron lit the menorah, when Aaron was commanded by HaKadosh Baruch Hu to light the menorah in the Mishkan, the pasuk tells us, Vayas Kain Aaron. This is what Aaron did. When we look into Rashi, Rashi tells us, Lahagid Shvoche Shel Aaron. It comes to tell us a praise on Aaron. What is the praise on Aaron? Shaloi Shina, he did not change. He did exactly what HaKadosh Baruch Hu told him to do. So the question arises, we're talking about a personality like Aaron HaKoyin. Aaron HaKoyin is Zoiche, he's being merited, has the merit of lighting the menorah the first time. What does the Torah tell us? That Aaron did exactly what the Rebbe told him to do. Who wouldn't do what the Rebbe tells him to? At such a moment, at such a high inspired moment, naturally he's doing exactly what the Rebbe tells him. So Rashi goes further. What does Rashi say? Lahagid shvoche shel Aaron. It comes to tell us a praise on Aaron. What is the praise on Aaron? Shaloi shina. He did not make any changes. Aaron would make changes what the Rebbe tells him, how the Rebbe tells him to light the menorah. The Rebbe says, imagine somebody is dancing Simchas Torah, and dancing really with the fullest enthusiasm that one has when he dances on Simchas Torah. And all of a sudden this person is told that he has to go ahead and light a menorah and make sure that he fills every little jar accordingly, every little cup has the exact same amount, and everything is filled to the fullest accuracy. The person at that time, who is in such high spirits of celebrating Simchas Torah and dancing and singing and dancing on Simchas Torah, you know what's going to happen? The oil that he's spilling, he will overspill. The little cups are going to fall down, and he'll never manage to do a job, a proper and accurate job, at the time he's in such high spirit moment. Same the Rebbe says is with Aaron. Aaron was celebrating Chanukah, What Chanukah? The Chanukas HaMishkan, the renewal, the dedication of the Mishkan. And Aaron was extremely joyful, and he was in a very, very high madrega at that time. And here Aaron is told that he has to do something, and it has to be fulfilled to the fullest accuracy, and this is the way it has to be poured, and this much oil has to be poured into every little cup, and it has to be done at this and this time. Somebody else, at such a moment, not Chas v'Shalom would want to change because he wouldn't want to do what the Rebbe tells him to. On the contrary, he would be in such high spirits and so out of himself. The Rebbe says, imagine we are telling a child who is extremely joyful on Simchas Torah, and we tell him, stop in the middle of your dancing and start translating a pasuk, and to explain the pasuk slowly and touch up every single word of the pasuk. It's not going to work. Why is it not going to work? Because the child at that time is involved in a different world. The child at that time is involved in dancing and rejoicing with Simchas Torah. The same with Aaron HaKohen. Aaron HaKohen here was highly involved in celebrating the Chanukas HaMishkan. Memela, here he's told how he has to pour the oil, and it has to be done in such a perfect way, and everything to the fullest accuracy, to the T, so careful. And Aaron still at such a moment fulfilled everything perfectly. And this is the greatness of Aaron. Lahagit shvachos shel Aaron, here we are told the praise on Aaron, shelo shino, that he did not make a change. In other words, it means that the oil didn't fall out of his hand, the cup didn't drop, and he himself held balanced properly to be able to put everything in perfectly. This is the greatness of Aaron, that at such a great, an outstanding, inspiring moment, he was still kind of halting cup. He was still holding his head. In other words, expression in Yiddish, halten cup. He was still knowing exactly what has to be done and fulfilling it perfectly. As it's customary in the Farbrengens that the Rebbe raises questions in the Rashi of the Seder of the week, and also explains in the Rambam, the daily Shia of the Rambam. In today's Farbrengen, the Rebbe raised a few questions in the Seder. Some of them he answered, some of them he did not answer. First of all, the Rebbe raised the question as follows. We know, Chazal tell us, Yofes sichoson shel avdei avos mitoyroson shel banim. We know that the Rebishter treasures and appreciates the conversation of the servants of the avos more than toyroson shel banim, than the Torah of children, of Bnei Yisrael. How do we see this? Because the trip of Eliezer, when Eliezer went to find Rivka for Yitzchak, is repeated in the Torah twice. It's repeated all the details, what Avraham told Eliezer. Then when Eliezer arrived at Rivka's house, the Torah tells us exactly how Eliezer repeated word by word whatever Avraham told him to say. So normally we know that in the Torah every word is extremely accurate, and at times we even derive halachas from one letter or from one word. And here we have an entire parsha which is repeated twice in the Torah on the same issue. So based on that, the Gemara and Medrash give us this interpretation of Yofes Yichoson Shel Avdei Avos Mitoyroson Shel Banim. This is all pertaining, these inyanim in Torah, which have a shaykhs to the Avos, or to Avdei Avos at least, something which has a shaykhs to Avraham, Yitzchak, Yaakov. However, before we read about Avraham, we have in Yonim in Torah where the Torah tells us all the generations of the Goyish generations. Why does the Torah elaborate on all of that? So this, the Rebbe says, is no question. I think the Rebbe spoke about it a while ago. Because, as Rashi explains us right away at the beginning of Chumash, that actually the Torah should have really began with Achodesh Hazeh Lachem, which is the first mitzvah, but the Rebishter began with Bereishis, so that we should know that the Rebishter is the one that created the world. Initially, he gave it to the Goyim, so the Torah tells us all about how the Rebishter appointed, how there were all the Goyish kingdoms in existence. But all of this is told, why? So that we should know later that the Rebishter is the Balabas of the world, and he gave it like a to the Goyim, and and later it is within his power to take it from the Goyim and give it to Yidden. And the Goyim cannot come out and say that the Yidden are listim, that the Yidden are thieves, by taking Eretz Yisrael away from them, because the Rebbeinu is the one who has given it to us. This is what we learn in the first Rashi in Bereshis. Fine. So with this interpretation, we can understand why we read all the details of Parshas Bereshis and Parshas Noach, which tells us about all the various Goyim and all the kingdoms and how long they lived and so forth, because all of this is told as an introduction who the Rebbeinu gave the world to. Initially, and that later the Rebbeinu took it from them and gave Eretz Yisrael to us, and that we have a full authority to Eretz Yisrael. However, in this week's Chazarah, we read about a dream of Pari. Actually, what is it? It's a dream of a Goy. Torah tells us what the dream of Pari was. The Torah doesn't say it once, the Torah says it twice. And both times in fullest details. First, the Torah says what Pari dreamt. And the Torah tells us both of the dreams. Then, when Pari met Yosef, the Torah repeats, pasuk by pasuk, exactly what happened in the dreams. Why is there a need for the Torah to repeat it? Obviously, pasuk could have said only that Pari related to Yosef the dreams which he had. No, Torah doesn't limit itself with that, and the Rebbeinu Shalom tells us again exactly what Pari's dream was. Question is strong. The first time, when the Torah tells us about the two dreams of Pari, true, we have to know that he dreamt two dreams, because both of the dreams, the repeat of the Cholam, as that Yosef interpreted, there is meaning in that. However, true, there is meaning in that, but the Torah could have told us the dream that he had about the cows, and then the Torah could have continued that he had a similar dream with regarding the tfuah, regarding the wheat. There is no need for the Torah to repeat in precise detail the second dream. So at the time we know that everything in Torah is extremely accurate, what is the interpretation, what is the reason why the Torah elaborated so on the dreams of Pari? After all it is, it's dreams of a guy. What is the meaning behind all this? Why the Torah relates this in such detail? This question the Rebbe did not answer. Then the Rebbe raised another question. After Pari listened to Yosef's interpretation of the dream, and Pari was extremely impressed with Yosef's way of interpreting the dream, the Torah tells us that Pari gave Yosef his appointment. Vayikra Pari Shem Yosef Tzofnas Paneach. And Pari gave him a name. His name was Tzofnas Paneach. What does Tzofnas Paneach mean? So Rashi tells us that he explains hidden things. In other words, he was the one that was able to explain this dream, and as an appreciation of him explaining the dream, Pari gave him this title of Tzofnas Paneach. If we look at the Rashi says that the word Tzofnas, Tzofin, we have similar words in the Torah. However, the word Paneach, there's no similarity to the word Paneach anywhere in Mikra, anywhere in the Torah. Question, however, arises. Yosef was a 30-year-old man at this time. 30-year-old man whose name was Yosef. Why should Pari all of a sudden give him a different name? So the truth is that in Divrei Hayomim in Tanakh, we read about Nebuchadnezzar Melech Bavel, after he conquered Eretz Yisrael. So there we read that he gave the Melech of Eretz Yisrael, he gave him a different name. So Rashi there explains, what is the reason for it? That it was customary that when a king would take over rulership over another king, he would change his name. That's what Rashi tells us in Divrei Hayom. Fine. So we see that Rashi in Divrei Hayomim sees reason to say why a name of an adult was changed and why a name of a person was changed. Here we learn the fact that Pari named Yosef Tzofnas Paneach. However, we do not find an interpretation. Why was there a need? And Rashi does not mention anything. How come that Pari went ahead and changed the name of a 30-year-old person? The Rebbe mentioned this in Even Ezra, The Ibn Ezra here in the Pasuk, Ibn Ezra says something very interesting. He says, Pari spoke Egyptian. Pari did not speak Hebrew. Didn't understand Hebrew. So the name Tzafnas Paneach, Ibn Ezra expression. But obviously, Rashi does not accept this interpretation, because Rashi does explain what Tzafnas Paneach means. We're not learning that it's an Egyptian word. However, Rebbe continues, there is no need for Rashi here to give us reason why Yosef changed his name. Rather, why Pari changed Yosef's name. What? Pari was extremely impressed with Yosef's interpretation, to such an extent that he's appointing him, and he's telling him that he's going to be the one that's going to run his entire administration. And he's telling him, Ubiladecha, except you, lo yorim ishes yodei v'esragloi b'chol eretz Mitzrayim. Nobody is authorized to lift his hand off them. In other words, he's giving Yosef full authority. By the fact that he's naming Yosef Tzafnas Paneach, this is, Pari wants this publicized. Why? Because this is the reason he's giving Yosef this authority. There's no question here in the child's mind, the child who's learning Chumash, the Ben Chumash Lamikra, who Rashi is concerned with, because a 5-year-old child is the one who's learning Chumash and needs the Chumash interpretation. Like I said, when a child is already older, he's a Ben Essa, then he already has access to Mishnah. But when he's learning as a 5-year-old, he wants to understand the Pshat and the Chumash, Pshuta Shel Mikra, based on the Pshat of the Pasuk. Based on the Pshat of the Pasuk, the child will not have any question. Why Takeh? Did Pari change Yosef's name and named him Tzafnas Paneach? There's no such question. Why? Because as we're going along the sequence of the Psukim, it's very obvious. By publicizing his name, Tzafnas Paneach, which means, the way Rashi learns, not like the way Ibn Ezra learns, which means that he is this intelligent and wise person that could reveal the hidden, and therefore he was successful in interpreting the dream. By doing this, by Pari publicizing this name, this new name to Yosef, this is the reason why everybody should respect Yosef, and why everybody should listen to whatever Yosef says, and accept Yosef. And as the Rebbe continued, that when Rashi wrote his Pirush, Rashi explains anything that needs explanation. Anything which, when we learn the Pasuk Chumash and we find it is not understood, Rashi comes and explains it. That is why we find, sometimes in Chumash, that Rashi will say, Eini Yodeya, I don't know. If Rashi doesn't know, why does he say it altogether? Let him not say anything. The reason behind this is because Rashi is bringing to our attention that this Inyan here needs interpretation, needs a clarification. However, I don't know. He doesn't know what it is. At the same time, the Rebbe says, there are many times we learn Psukim, and there are very obvious questions in the Pasuk. And if we look into Rashi, Rashi doesn't say anything. Why doesn't Rashi say anything then? So the Rebbe says, reason is, this in itself is also part of Rashi's method of learning Chumash with us. Rashi is explaining some inyanim to the child, and then there are other inyanim which Rashi is not explaining. Why is he not explaining these other inyanim? Because he wants that the child on his own, who's learning Chumash, should dwell into the Pasuk and take inyanim apart, and the child himself will come to a reason why this and this is so. And Rashi intentionally does not explain this in. This is, the Rebbe says, similar to what the Gemara says, that when a Rebbe teaches with children, there has to be an approach of Yemin Mikareves Usmoil Deicha. With his right hand he has to bring close his pupil, and with his left hand he has to push him away. And both of these attitudes have to be utilized at the same time. In other words, on one hand he has to express a closeness to the student, and on the other hand there's a discipline which has to exist between the student and his Rebbe. So the Rebbe is teaching this. This is Rashi's way of learning with us, is the same way. Certain things, Rashi tells us, Yemin Mikareves. Part of the method which Rashi has instituted, the way he set up his Perush, is that there are times when there are very obvious questions, and then we ask a question, such an obvious question, why doesn't Rashi say anything? So the answer is, Rashi wants that the child who is learning the Chumash should himself take the Inyan apart and be able to come to an answer and a conclusion on his own. While talking on this Inyan, Rebbe says that by the Rebishter, by HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we find the same attitude. At times, HaKadosh Baruch Hu reveals Inyanim to us, and there's an attitude of Yemin Mikareves, an attitude of closeness from Hashem to us. And at times, HaKadosh Baruch Hu acts in a way where we cannot understand. However, the Rebbe says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu acting in the way that we cannot understand, and primarily us being in Golus that long, this is already something which the Rebishter has gone above board. In other words, this is something which the Rebishter shouldn't have done so much. And what is our obligation? It is the obligation of each and every Yid to beg of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, beg, demand, and scream to the Rebishter, Ad Mosai. How much longer will the Rebishter keep us in Golus? The Rebbe says it's something which is over 1900 years that we are in Golus. And there are Svarim that tell us that it is the obligation of each and every Yid. The Rebbe mentioned just a few of them. The Rebbe mentioned that it's brought in the Rikeach, it's one of the Kadmoinim. It is brought in the Chidah. It is brought in the other Svarim, that it is the obligation of each and every Yid to constantly demand from HaKadosh Baruch Hu at every occasion that the Rebishter should take us out of Golus. Ad Mosai, like we find the expression in Tillim. The Ad Mosai is an expression in Tillim. How much longer will we stay in Golus? And this, the Rebbe says, is the requirement of this generation, of our time. Now in particular, we have to demand from the Rebishter that the Rebishter should take us out of Golus. Here the Rebbe says there are those that claim Minag Aviseinu Biyadenu. They adhere to the customs of their ancestors. And being that this wasn't a popular thing by their ancestors, to constantly demand for the coming of Mashiach, that is why they want to follow the same path. The Rebbe says, Minag Aviseinu Biyadenu, to hold on to your ancestors, minig to your families, minhagim, is something which is very nice. However, not at a time when it's a question of Shchinta Bigalusa. HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Shchina, is in Golus with each and every one of us Yidden. And as the Pasuk says, B'chol tzarasam loitzor. All the tzaras of Yidden, it is a tzara for HaKadosh Baruch Hu as well, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu is with them in each and every tzara. Therefore, it is our obligation that we constantly have to beg and demand, Ad Mosai, how much longer will we be in Golus? The Rebbe says there used to be an expression, in the old home there was an expression that one wanted to show that he's good, he looks okay. So the expression would be in Yiddish, kneipen de backen, sie sollen werden reut. One would, again, pinch his cheeks so that his cheeks will turn red. Same the Rebbe says, in other words, this is an expression of doing things against his will. In other words, he's forcing himself into a situation. Our begging for the coming of Mashiach does not have to be in a way where we're forcing ourselves into it, but it has to be with the fullest enthusiasm and the fullest koiches that we have. We have to constantly demand from the Rebishter, like we did today, like we do in davening. Rebbe says in the morning when we daven Musaf in Kesser. In Kesser we beg Veinenu Serena Melchosecha. We beg that the Rebishter should take us. We should be able to. Mashiach should come. Soon the Rebbe says we will daven Ma'ariv, and Ma'ariv we will recite V'sachzenu Inenu B'shufcha L'tzir Barachamim. And we say this in every Shemona Esrei. And again, at every occasion we have to beg from the Rabbeinu Shalom that the Rabbeinu Shalom should send us Mashiach. Ad Masai, how much longer we will be in Golus? It's already the highest point that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should take us out of Golus. Another inyan which the Rebbe explained in this week's Sedra
is regarding the attitude of Yosef and his brothers. Yosef and his brothers, we read initially Yosef was very harsh to them, very unfriendly. Then the pasuk continues. That Yosef instructed his people how they should fill up the sacks of his brothers. The pasuk says that their sacks should be filled, and together with that, he should give along tzeidah ladorech, which means food for the way. Right away, Kapitel Mem Dalet, the first pasuk. Vayitzav es asher al beisa. Yosef commanded whoever was on his house, the people in charge of his house, Lamer as follows: Maliyes amteres ha'anoshem oichel. Fill up the bags of these people with food. Kasher yuchlon says as much as they could carry. Also put money, and also give them along tzeidah ladarach, give them along food for their way. So I was asking, what's really happening here? They came to buy food. That's what they came for, and they're paying for food. So what does he say? Fill up their bags with food. They bought. So whatever they bought, they're entitled to get, naturally. So obviously, what is the meaning of maleyes amteches ha'anoshem oichel? Fill them up, give them something more than they bought. They bought certain value. You give them more than they bought. Fill it up. Make sure it's filled up fully. Then give them along food for their way. Something very strange. People came to buy food. Why is he doing this to them? If they came to buy food, obviously they have food for the way also. Why is he instructing the people who are heading his household that he should give along something extra? They should give him along tzeidah ladarach, food for the way. Something which is very strange. What's Yosef's reason for it? Why is he saying that they should overfill their bags with food? They came and they paid and they bought food. Let them go home with whatever value of food that they paid, that they purchased. So the Rebbe is learning. We already learned previously in the Sedra. This is something which was discussed in the Sichas in the middle of this week, that the brothers, through their whole attitude, this led Yosef to come up with a statement, Esolekim ani yorei, I am God-fearing. The Rebbe says this is, he's still talking Wednesday, this is something in itself a great Inyan. Yosef, who was the leader, who was the ruler of Mitzrayim, should come up with an exclamation, Esolekim ani yorei, that he's God-fearing. So Yosef was standing in a tnuah, in a mood of Yirah Shamayim. Yosef, on one hand, did harm to his brothers. Harmed them, I mean, he caused them inconvenience. Being that Yosef expressed himself, Esolekim ani yorei, so that is why Yosef wanted to do an act whereby he will be able to express some sort of an apology for the wrongdoings that he did to them. And therefore, Yosef instructed the people, Maleyes amteches ha'anoshem oichel, kasher yuchlon says, give them along extra food. In other words, this is more than what they bought and paid for. Give them something extra. Also give them tzeidah ladarach, food for the way, which is also something extra. True, they came to buy food and they're going home with food, but Yosef here is looking for ways and means, like to give them something additional, to give them something which they don't deserve. Why is he doing it? This is to do something which should make up for the inconvenience which Yosef has caused them. Incidentally, when the Rebbe was talking Wednesday evening, the Rebbe said that when the brothers were having their controversy with Yosef, and they saw things are going wrong,
what did they begin to do? They began to be lefashfesh b'maaseim. They began to be looking into their act, their deeds, their acts. In other words, they began thinking, why do they deserve such a treatment? Where did they do something wrong that they're being treated so cruelly now? Until it dawned on them the fact that they did by selling their brother Yosef. Rebbe says this is a remarkable thing. This is over 20 years since they have sold Yosef. And here they are in a moment of a dilemma where they are realizing that they did something wrong, and that is why they are being treated in this way which they thought they did not deserve. And all the years, of 20 plus years, they didn't do anything else wrong. It's a tremendous sitkus. Rabbi says this is something which should be the wish of a Jew. Miketz das wünschen. One should wish this to another. That when one begins thinking, one comes to make it totally sachakel of his mindset, of his deeds. And he's trying to realize, why is he being mistreated? In other words, where did he go wrong? Where does he find something which he did wrong? 22 years ago. Meaning that since then, they have nothing wrong. Tremendous thing happened here. And the Rebbe kept on stressing, this is something which should be our wish, that for a period of 22 years, more than a bar mitzvah period, more than 13 years, which is a span of 13, more than 20, which is a certain cycle of years, over 20 years, not to do anything wrong. And when they begin to be mefashvish b'maseim, they will begin to think back in their acts and their deeds. Where do they find something wrong? Over 20 years ago. I think outstanding. In the Farbrengen, today the Rebbe again referred to what was spoken in the middle of the week. In the middle of the week, the Rebbe requested and begged each and every one of us to see to it that more Chabad houses are opened. And the Rebbe spoke about opening Chabad houses on two levels. There's the general Chabad house, and there's the broadening the activities of an existing Chabad house and opening a new Chabad house. However, there's the individual Chabad house which everyone is capable of creating within their own homes, within our own self. And as the Rebbe explained, the idea of a Chabad house is to excel in the three avenues of Torah, Avodah, and Gemilas Chasadim. Learning of Torah, davening, and Gemilas Chasadim, doing deeds of charitable deeds of tzedakah and Gemilas Chesed. And as the Rebbe spoke when he was talking to the children, the Rebbe asked the children to see to it that every child's room is a Chabad house. The Rebbe suggested to the children and asked of them that they set up their rooms, that in every room they have all of these inyanim. There should be a tzedakah pushka in every room, which is the inyan of Gemilas Chesed. Then they should have a chumash in their room. A chumash is Torah. And also to have a siddur in every child's room, which a siddur is the inyan of avodah. So by combining Torah, a siddur, a chumash, and a tzedakah pushka, we have a combination of Torah, avodah, and the Gemilas Chesed. In today's Rambam, in today's Shir of the Rambam, which is in the halachas of malva v'loive, one giving a loan to another, the halachas which are discussed are if one gave a loan to another person, the recipient of the loan is not paying the loan properly. So there are certain guidelines which the Rambam tells us how the person who gave the loan is permitted to go about and collect from the recipient. In other words, Bezdin has, after a certain amount of time has elapsed, we have to give him 30 days and we have to give him notice. In other words, the leiva, the loaner, has to be treated properly and given a chance and given an opportunity to repay. If after all chances he's given, he does not repay, then the malva, the one who has given the loan, is permitted by the authorization of a bezdin, by the authorization of a Jewish court, to go into his property and take the value of what the person owes. Rebbe says, based on the Rambam, which the Rambam tells us that mitzvahs in general are given liyasher hadeyos v'halvavos, to straighten out our minds and our emotions. We also know that Pasuk tells us, Magi dvarav liyakov Chukav u'mishpatav liYisrael. The Rebishter teaches his laws to Yidden. So the Medrash says on this pasuk that whatever the Rebishter tells us to do, he himself fulfills as well. Based on this, there's a Gemara Bava Basra. Rabbi says it's like a Gemara of Halacha Bava Basra. However, this inyan is discussed in the Agadata, in the Agoda part of Gemara. There the Gemara tells us, Malva Hashem Choynein Dal. One who extends a hand to the poor, he's nice to the poor, it is like he's given a loan to HaKadosh Baruch. So by us giving tzedakah, we are giving really a loan to the Rebishter. Rabbi says, if this is a Gemara, and obviously it's hard to say that the Rebishter is the person who's indebted to us. I mean, this is actually what we're saying, that by us giving tzedakah, we cause that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should be indebted to us. So based on the Gemara only, it's one thing. But we have the Alter Rebbe in Egeras HaKodesh, where the Alter Rebbe discusses the greatness of tzedakah. That is where the Alter Rebbe explains how great tzedakah is and the importance of tzedakah and how we are to excel in tzedakah. And there the Alter Rebbe elaborates that this is one of the fundamentals of Amunah, that by giving tzedakah, we are giving a loan to the Rebishter, and the Rebishter is the one who is going to be repaying us. Because he has to pay back the loan. Especially, the Rebbe says, recently, Rebbe says he himself, we are talking constantly by Farbrengens, demanding and stressing the importance of tzedakah. To such an extent that tzedakah, it's worthy to give tzedakah daily. Not only is it worthy to give tzedakah daily, but there are specific times when we are really to excel in tzedakah. The Rebbe mentioned that is on Erev Shabbos, and on Erev Rosh Chodesh, and on Erev Yontef. These are particular times when we are to excel in tzedakah. So in Mela we see that excelling in tzedakah is something which is very much needed and praiseworthy, especially in this generation, especially nowadays. In Mela it comes out to be that by each and every act of tzedakah that we are doing, we are actually giving the Rabbeinu Shalom alone. This is what the pasuk tells us. Malva Hashem Choynein Dal. The one who is Choynein Dal, who is stretching out an arm of chanina, of doing good, doing kindness, expressing kindness to the poor, he's a Malva Hashem. We're giving a loan to the Rebishter. Memela, the Rebishter has to adhere to all of these halachas, which one who lends money has to adhere to. And the Rebbe began explaining this, and the Rebbe said he would get back to it at a better occasion. Towards the end of the Farbrengen, the Rebbe again alerted on the importance of opening Batei Chabad, and also stressed the importance of Asei Lecha Rav. Again, that each and every one of us should make sure that we have chosen a Rav, which is something which the Rebbe has been asking from us the last couple of months. The Rebbe concluded that we should also utilize the remainder of days tonight, which is Motzoi Chanukah, Motzoi Zois Chanukah particularly, and the nearby days. All of these days should be utilized in the spirit of Chanukah, and of all of our pa'ulas, all of our deeds which we will do in these days will be blessed with Atzlacha. The Rebbe concluded the Farbrengen that we may be Zoiche, that from the celebration of Chanukah, we will immediately enter to the celebration of another Chanukah. But this will be the Chanukah, which Chanukah is mentioned. Chanukah originates from the word, the celebration of a dedication. Then we celebrated the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash at that time. Now we should be able to again celebrate the dedication of the Beis HaMikdash, which will come immediately with the coming of Mashiach Tzidkenu. And the Rebbe stressed that all of this should be done through Simcha, again stressing the importance of Simcha, and that we should be Zeiche, that the Suda of tonight's Malava Malke, we should already be able to eat together with Mashiach Tzidkenu. A gute Woche.